Hey, welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to be able to TIG weld aluminum in a very clear and step-by-step format. So let's not waste any time, let's go! Now before we start, I want to make this video a very clean, clear, step-by-step kind of instructional video with not a lot about all the extras and kind of the intricacies of welding aluminum. Now I just made another video and I will put a link above so that you can go watch it. I highly recommend you go watch that before this one because it's going into all of the kind of unique things that are different for TIG welding aluminum, such as the aluminum itself, why you have to have AC on your TIG machine for that, what AC balance control does and how it works for you, different tungstens, and even how to ball your tungsten. I put all of that into that video so that I could make this video here a nice short and sweet one. So go watch it. Come back to this one. Now with TIG welding, we know that it is a bit more of a picky welding process and it really requires that our material is nice and clean, and welding aluminum is no different. It's even more so. So first thing we're going to do to make sure there's no oil and contaminants on the surface, we're going to get a cloth and some acetone or some kind of aluminum cleaner, and we're going to wipe the surfaces off and get rid of all that grease and grit. And while you're at it, why not even wipe down the filler rods as well, just in case. Now, the next thing is there's aluminum oxide on the surface, and you will not be able to weld this without cleaning that off. So the best thing that I have found is get yourself a dedicated for aluminum only stainless steel wire brush. You can use this size or even the toothbrush kind of smaller sizes. And when you go to brush the material, always go in one direction so that you're not kind of pushing that aluminum oxide down into the raw aluminum that you're cleaning. And you will know when you are done because aluminum oxide is very, very hard. So this will feel kind of like it's gliding on the surface as you're pushing. And then 5, 6, 7 strokes in, it'll start to get a little bit of a bite as the stainless steel brush bristles start to bite into the softer aluminum. When that happens, a couple strokes more and you should be done. Okay, and remember with welding, we should always be focused on safety. So when you are done with this flammable, combustible, exploding stuff, get it out of your welding area so you got no issues there. Make sure your ground clamp is attached to the table. Get your pedal set up in a nice low chair so that you're comfortable and ready to weld. When you're TIG welding aluminum, the shielding gas you're going to want to use is 100% argon. That's going to be most applications up to about 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters thick plate. And then once you get thicker than that, they actually start putting a little bit of helium into the mix, and that helps with better thermal conductivity and allows better penetration on the thicker plates. Now, as for the actual gas flow rate coming out of your torch, you're going to want some minimums here. I would suggest that you don't go anything lower than about 9 or 10 liters per minute. And if you're working with cubic feet per hour, that's about 15 to 20 CFH. Now that will go up or down depending mostly on the size of the hole of the cup in your TIG torch. And if you've got no idea how to start this up, I will put a link down in the description below where you basically tell it what you're doing for welding, and then it spits out your flow rates and amperages so you have a good starting point. Now, speaking of the gas flow rates, more is not better. So if you crank it right up thinking you're actually putting more gas and it's better, you can actually have so much gas flowing out of the torch that it causes a little bit of turbulence and it can suck in the atmosphere and put it right into your weld pool. Now, other tips for you, when you open up your cylinder valve here, take a look at your gauge. It might actually be empty, and that would be a horrible way to start your weld. And then when you turn on the machine, you're going to have some post flow going on for a couple seconds at least. That's when you're going to adjust your flow meter or your regulator so that you get your flow rates proper. And if it's not going, all you got to do is tap the pedal and then that'll start that post flow, and then you can set it then. Now, last thing about post flow, you can crank that right up so you have a lot of post flow going on to make sure everything is protected. However, you are paying for that gas and it gets a bit more expensive. So what I recommend is once you stop welding and you see the electrode starting to glow and it starts to go away, as soon as that glow goes away, I would say a couple more seconds past that, and then that would be a good time for your post flow. Now, every machine is going to be slightly different. However, the basic setups are going to be the same on everything. So this is a Lincoln Electric 225 Precision TIG. First thing we're going to want is AC. So if it's not there, make sure you shut it off before you select AC. And the AC is going to give us the positive electricity from the sine wave, is going to be helping us clean off the aluminum oxides, although it's going to heat up our electrode. And then when it goes down into the negative side of the sine wave, we get the penetration and heat down into the metal and some cooling action for our electrode. So we do want it to have it on AC. Now the next thing is, how much do we set our amps to? Well, we can adjust it with this output knob here. I would suggest a good starting point is 1 amp per thousandths of inch thickness. So if you are welding something that is 1/8 thick, 1 divided by 8 in decimal form is 0.125. Get rid of the decimal, and that's how we're getting to this 125. Now, keep in mind, this is just a starting point. You may have to go down or up from there, and we are definitely not just mashing the pedal to the ground and holding it at 125 amps when we're welding. This one here, in order to get the setting here, we want to put it to TIG. So from stick to TIG. And then we've got our AC balance. Now, it does have a green kind of auto setting here, and the light turns on here to let you know that's there. If you do not know what you're doing at all, it would be a good kind of starting point. However, once you figure out what penetration and cleaning is all about from my previous video that I told you to watch, you can adjust this to have either way, whichever you want more. If you're finding that your aluminum is dirty and you're having trouble breaking through those aluminum oxides, then you can just slowly adjust the cleaning, practice on a scrap piece of aluminum and adjust it and find out what you actually need. So for me, that's right there, that works out pretty good. Now, pulse frequency, you don't need this on, you can leave it off. However, if you're welding thin stuff, and sometimes aluminum can be a little picky with how much heat it's getting, so you can kind of think of a pulse frequency control knob like this as kind of like a heat control. It is going to allow 125 amps to go right in there and penetrate and make a puddle, but then a split second later it's coming back and it's going to the least amount of amperage in there so that we're not soaking the piece in heat. And the cool thing about this is you can adjust this, and the little light flashes to tell you kind of how it's going to look with the heat when you're actually welding. And if you have it low enough, you can even get this to time when you're supposed to put your filler rod in so that you can get a little bit more consistent with your filler rod. Now, this machine does not have a setting for frequency, but if you've got a new inverter machine, you're going to have that. So a good starting point would be about 100 hertz, and then you can go up or down from there. Now, when you go down with the frequency, you're going to get a wider arc cone, which is a little bit less unstable. However, we're going to have way more heat put into the material. So this is good for thicker plates, or you want a wider weld bead, or you want to deposit a lot of material quickly. Now, when you go up with the frequency, this is going to make a tighter, more precise, more stable arc cone. And this is going to give you a narrower weld bead. And this is really good at doing things where you're going to get into the corner and do fillet welds, or just thinner material in general. Now, when you're picking your filler rod for aluminum TIG welding, you have two main choices that are going to cover about 80% of the different aluminums you're going to weld. Now, you have 4043 and you have 5356. Now, the 4043 is a very good general purpose rod. It has a slightly lower melting point, so it allows you to have a little less distortion in your parts and also reduce the risk of cracks. It should make very nice, clean, bright, shiny looking welds for you. And you'll notice that the weld puddle will be very fluid. It flows very, very nice when you're doing your projects. Now, the 5356, the main choice for picking this is a higher strength, higher shear strength, higher ductility, higher tensile strength. And you're going to be using this for any of your 5000, 6000 series aluminums that you're welding. And if you're doing any anodizing with your part after, you probably should be using 5356. Now, as for what kind of tungsten electrode should you be using when TIG welding aluminum, there is a lot of choice out there, and often it comes down to personal preference or maybe factors like what kind of machine you have. Now, when you look on a chart to see what these electrodes do, any of those electrodes that say they can weld AC, that's going to weld aluminum for you. Now, some really popular choices these days are 2% serrated, 2% lanthanated, any of the rare earth E3 stuff. All of these are a little bit better at welding on AC because they have a higher melting point than pure tungsten. Now, in our shop, we are very much a Canadian shop, so we stick to the red-green. So red is 2% thoriated. We use that when we're on DC negative for all our steel, stainless, cast. And then when we get to AC and we flip that switch, we switch up to our green, which is the 100% pure tungsten. Now, because I like to run mine on the cleaning cycle a little bit too hot, I do start with a little ball on the end of my tungsten. So let me show you how I do that. Now when you're putting your tungsten electrode inside of your torch, a good setting for the stick out, which is the amount from the end of the torch cup to the end of the electrode, should be no longer or no further out than the diameter of the inside of the hole on your torch cup. Anything more than that, you're going to run the risk of not protecting and shielding the end. Now you can just sneak in a little bit more than that, however you're not really gaining much benefit from that, and it starts to make it a little bit harder to see what you're doing. I'm going to ball the tungsten here, and how I'm going to do that, I'm going to go to my AC balance control and I'm going to put it to the maximum clean setting so that I'm getting lots of nice heat going up into the electrode, and it's going to melt the end and ball it up. Now in order to do this, I get a scrap piece of aluminum. I hold the electrode about 1/8 of an inch up from that aluminum, and then when I put the pedal down, I'm going to watch my electrode to see that the end is getting hot and rounding over. And when I get that ball to the size that I want, simply let off the pedal, let it cool down, and you're done. Don't forget to change your AC balance control back to where you want it when you're welding. And for me, I never make that ball anywhere near the size of the diameter of the electrode. I tend to leave a little bit of the cone on there, or the taper part, and that helps me have a little bit more focused and stable arc. All right, a couple things before we do our first weld bead here. Now, aluminum loves to dissipate heat quickly. So when we go to start here, we're gonna mash the pedal down to get it the maximum amount of amperage that we set on the machine to get that heat in and get a puddle formed quickly. Now, once we have a puddle formed, we are not able to hold that pedal down. Otherwise, it's gonna be too hot. So you're gonna have to back off on the pedal, and I can't tell you how much. It's gonna have to be just you observing the puddle and the weld bead to figure that out. Now, once we have that puddle formed, we're gonna take our filler rod, we're gonna dip it to the front edge of the puddle, and you're gonna be surprised at how much you actually have to feed. I find that with aluminum, you feel like you're feeding it way faster than steel. However, there is kind of another cooling effect that's going on because you're putting cold aluminum into that puddle, so you can kind of use that to help with the temperature control as well. Now, once you get moving, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. You've got how fast you should be feeding your filler rod, how fast your torch should be going. There should be a little bit of about 10, maybe 15 degree forward angle of the torch. The electrode should be up off the material about the diameter of the electrode and no more than twice the diameter. So for me, it's about 1/8 of an inch without sticking and dipping it into the puddle. And you're also got your pedal control that you have to manage as well. So it's a lot going on, and this is why aluminum TIG welding can be tricky. Now, as you're welding, when you get to the end of the piece, you have to back off because there's less material for that heat to dissipate and it will get hot for you. So the other thing is when you are just about done and ready to pull away, don't just let go of the pedal. You're gonna have to slowly back it off as you're still kind of slowly adding a little bit of material from the filler rod. Otherwise, you will end up with a hole or a crater. And when we're doing aluminum, they could be susceptible to having some cracking start there. All right, now that I've done the spiel, let's see if we can lay a good bead. All right, let's take a look at this weld. Now, I'm pretty happy right off the bat that it's nice and straight, considering I didn't even scribe a line to follow. The width of the weld bead is pretty even from the beginning to the end and stays consistent. The height stays very consistent from beginning to end. There's no holes, very steady movement. It's almost like a little stack of dimes running along there. There is no hole in the beginning, and there is no hole or crater at the end that could induce some cracking going on. There is some etching that's on the sides, and it's somewhat even from both sides. It's a little bit big, so this is telling me that my machine is set a little bit more to the cleaning cycle. And it is hard to tell on my machine what it's at because I don't actually have a display. It's just a dial. So if I had to guess based off of where it's at, I would say this is about 60% negative, 40% positive. And I do kind of like to stay a little bit more on the cleaning cycle than most people because I know I get a cleaner, shinier looking weld. So not too bad. Now let's do some more welds here with obvious problems, and then we'll take a look at what they look like so that you can help diagnose your aluminum welds. All right, with these weld samples, I didn't change any settings except amperage so that I could show you two welds that are polar opposites. This is too hot and this is too cold. Now, if we look at the too hot, we got a bunch of stuff going on here. The weld bead itself is too hot, so it's going to be flatter and it's going to go wider. In fact, it's almost to the edge of our cleaning action here. And in the beginning here, it's a little wider than in the middle because there is simply less material to dissipate the heat at the beginning of the edge. And then when you get near the middle, there was more. Another thing you'll notice is it has this kind of grayed out kind of look to it. This is the aluminum oxides that are forming on the material because it's too hot. Now when we compare this to the too cold, it looks like that cleaning action has gotten bigger, but it hasn't. It's actually the same width. However, it's more obvious because we have this little weld bead that looks like a little worm from it being too cold. Now, first thing you'll notice, it's a little bit shinier, right? So you do tend to get cleaner welds with lesser temperatures. So you kind of have to use this as a gauge too, if you're wanting these shinier looking welds, then you got to watch your heat. Now, with this being too cold, it doesn't smooth out and flatten out. It kind of makes worms rather than kind of circular puddles. So it's very hard to control. In fact, when I was putting the filler rod, it was kind of not even wanting to flow properly and join the puddle properly. And you can tell with both that you actually have a little bit harder time controlling the puddle. With the too cold, it doesn't want to form a full puddle, so it kind of worms up and ties between being solid and liquid. And then with the too hot, we've got so much heat in here and the base material is melting away that it's really hard to control because it's too fluid. So this is too hot, this is too cold. So once again, with these samples here, I have decided to make two polar opposites so that you can kind of see what happens when you go towards one side or the other. Now, the adjustment that I made on this one was only my AC balance. So this one here, I have gone with a max cleaning side. So on my machine, it's close to 60% positive, 40% negative. And on this side is the maximum penetration, which is going to be 80% negative, 20% positive. Now on the max cleaning side, you can see that you do get nice clean welds. It's trying very hard to clean up any kind of contamination and kind of aluminum oxide. However, you end up with this massive etching kind of part grayed out around your weld bead because that's where it's stripping off the aluminum oxide. Now on the max pen size, you can see that right off the bat, it's got a duller look to it. And there might be a little bit of contamination, little speckles of stuff in here. And that's because it's just not getting cleaned enough and because it's focusing on trying to get the heat down. Now, that's the other thing to notice here is that with the penetration, we're getting more heat. So that weld bead is a little bit wider. a little bit smoother looking, whereas on the cold side there's less heat, so it's a little bit more colder looking and not as wide. With the sample here, you can see it started off okay, but as I started moving, I immediately started to slowly raise the distance that the electrode was away from the material. And somewhere around here would have been probably twice the diameter of the electrode. And as I gradually raised it, you can see that that weld pool, that puddle, the bead starts to get wider as I get going. And as it starts to go that way, we start to have a little bit, not as much gas coverage. So you can start to see the shine of the weld start to fade. And it gets a little bit more grainy in here because we just don't have that gas coverage. And the other thing that hopefully the video picked up, there is a little bit of loss of control because the further away the arc has to jump, it starts jumping kind of erratically. And you really do start losing a lot of control back here. Now, it looks like I laid into the heat and that's why I got wider. But as I noticed that the distance got further and further, it was depositing more heat in there. And I literally had to start backing off on the pedal to try to compensate for that. But yeah, the bigger the arc and the bigger the puddle, it was starting to get more heat as well. So you should be sticking to no more than twice the diameter of your electrode, and even one diameter of the electrode would be ideal, which in my case would have been about 1/8 of an inch, 3/32. All right, with this sample here, this is the beginning of me trying to show you what it's going to look like without having gas. Now over here, what I did was I turned on my gas, then I shut off the cylinder, and then when I started to weld, I had a couple seconds of gas, but then there was none at all. And so you can see what happens there, and on that video that I just showed you, it just goes poof, and then your electrode melts up and you are done. So no gas is no bueno, and that's gonna be really quite obvious. Then I tried to kind of go a little bit up more. So this was shutting the gas off completely. This was putting it to like 2 or 3 liters per minute, which is barely anything. And it basically did the same thing, just not as disastrous as the no gas. And then I kind of just crept on it, and I kind of just did a bunch of samples in here to try to creep up on the weld to try to get to a point where I could show you to the best of my abilities what a low gas, but you think you have enough gas flow looks like. Now I want you to note that with zero gas, look at all this carbon and gross contaminants and soot. And then with a little bit of gas, that kind of got smaller and a little better. And then with a little bit touch more gas, you know, I'm starting to be able to weld, but you can see there's this kind of black kind of peppering kind of look. And it's hard to see in the video, I think, so I'm gonna explain it. When you're welding in your shiny aluminum pool, you're gonna have these little black kind of things that are floating around in there, and that's the contaminants. They call that peppering. And if you can't clear it out, it ends up looking like little black kind of specks in your weld pool. Now, I used this sample to get to another one here. And so this one here was very, very low. This was about 5 liters per minute, about 8 cubic feet per hour. So enough gas to weld, but just not enough. And so if you look at it here at the very beginning during our start, because there's not a lot coming out at the start, we're having that cleaning action. We're trying to get some heat in there. There's a little bit of contamination happening here, a little bit of peppering and gross stuff in our weld puddle. And then you can kind of see that it's okay. I was able to do a weld, but it doesn't have that shine to it. So it's got a little bit of kind of oxides developing on there from lack of gas coverage. And then that was with a 5 to 10 degree torch angle in the direction that I'm going. Yet when I got to here, I kind of wasn't seeing what I wanted to show you guys. So what I ended up doing is taking my torch angle, and instead of being like this, I started to gently kind of creep it back and angle it back to almost like a 35, 45 degree angle at the end. So if you take a look at this, you can see that it starts to get cloudier and grainier. And then you can actually see these kind of little black specks in there. That's that peppering I was talking about. And that's just the gas coverage not covering it. We're getting contamination in there, and it's not looking great. Now, another reason for getting this kind of black, kind of peppering kind of look is when you accidentally dip your electrode and you decide, yeah, I'm gonna keep going. You can sometimes clean it out, or they call boiling it out. But if it doesn't clean up and you can see that black peppering kind of in your weld pool, it will be there in your final weld. So if you do dip, you really should stop, regrind your tungsten, and continue after that. It is a wrap on another video from Way the Wrench and on how to become a welder, this time on how to TIG weld aluminum. If you have any questions about the video, feel free to put them down below in the comment section and I will try to help you out as much as possible, and I'm usually very quick to respond. So now that we've got some TIG welding skills under our belt, why don't we try a project, and maybe not a project, but a fixing a project video. So I'm going to show you how to do some cast aluminum part repair so you can get your small engine or your automotive part back in business. If you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram? That way you can see what's going on in the shop in between videos. And until next time, take it easy.